The Bitcoiners, they're into Bitcoin. They're going to always be into Bitcoin, and I don't think that'll ever change.
I am here with Anthony Pompliano, known to his fans as Pomp. You've launched and sold companies, you have 100 million podcast downloads, you have almost 2 million followers on X, and now you are launching a daily show with X. Tell us what that's going to look like.
Yeah, we're launching a brand new original on X. If you think about what really that platform has become, is that's where the conversation around business and finance happens. And so historically what we've had to do is create content, whether that is in text, audio, or video form, and get people to go from X to some other platform. Mm-hmm. But now by partnering with the team, we can actually just bring the information directly to people where they are. We're really excited about it.
How did that come about, and what kind of investment are they making to support this show?
Yeah, the original team at X is a team that's about a year old or so. There's a very big focus for them internally. I think they realize the value of original content and bringing it onto that platform. They obviously really understand video and the importance there as well. We met the team. They actually came to our Christmas party, and we kind of just hit it off. And I think that we're power users of the platform. They have a big focus on this original content. We started talking about what are some things that we could do together, and they've launched a couple of other shows so far. Probably the most recent one is with Khloe Kardashian, and in meeting with the X team and really spending time with them, this is a major focus. And so from an investment standpoint, they have a lot of the team that is focused on making sure that these originals are successful, and we're excited to work with them on it.
And are they bringing in producers or paying you, or how does that work too with the revenue sharing?
We do everything in-house. So we're kind of fortunate in that if you think of my career, I kind of look at it as moving forward, people in the business world need to be able to do three things. They need to be able to operate companies, they need to be able to invest capital, and they need to be able to create content. And we think of it internally as like a triple threat. If you can do those three things, then you're in a pretty good position. And so in pursuing that, we have built an in-house production team. And so historically, people would have to go to these kind of external production teams, but we have one in-house. And then on top of that, we're also pretty adept at helping them figure out who the audience is, what the partners are. And so I would put us in more of the sophisticated bucket in partnering with a team like this.
Okay, interesting. And this isn't the first time that we've seen social media companies try and get into original content. Meta obviously tried to do that a few years ago. That didn't work out. It seems like there's been fits and starts even for X. Obviously the Don Lemon show did not pan out. How are they approaching it differently this time, you think, than they did previously or than other social media networks did?
I think a lot of social platforms, they've done what they thought was the right thing, which is they've gone to people who created great content on other platforms, usually in different kind of content types. So if you go to somebody who's been a TV host for a long time, that doesn't necessarily translate to kind of digital native platforms like X. And so by coming to somebody like myself or a Khloe Kardashian, we are very digital native. We understand what is the content that works. We understand what is the language, the culture of these platforms. And so it kind of gives you a leg up on being able to do that. But it also helps that I've got a pretty large audience already on X of the exact type of people that they're trying to reach. And so I think that, while other platforms have had, some success and some failure, by going to the digital native, it's a very, very different approach.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting point. And I also think about Cheddar too, because I remember that was so hot for so long and people thought, this is it. This is how we're going to reach millennials and younger people with business news. And again, it kind of fell flat. Why do you think that failed, and why do you think, you kind of answered this already, but obviously being a digital native and the fact that so many of your followers are already on the platform seems to be key. But
if you were to ask
tell me about the Cheddar problem.
Yeah, well, if you asked John Steinberg, it was a great win. He did perfectly well. But no, look, I think that for us, some of the things that probably would surprise people are our audience is very much self-directed investors. Now, when I say that, people think, are they all just day trading? That's actually not who they are. The audience is people across different industries. But what has happened in kind of business and finance is that people now have access to information. You can go on X or various other platforms, and you can get information about stocks or cryptocurrencies or real estate or whatever your choice asset is. And then also there's been a complete reduction of the friction to invest in these assets as well. And so you don't have to call up a stockbroker, you don't have to call up a financial advisor. You can just use certain platforms and go and buy the stock yourself. And so when you empower somebody to do it themselves, it allows for them to be an independent thinker and really go and act. And so we've been able to build a very large audience of these individuals. Now, usually people think that they're just investors. But everyone from the portfolio manager at a JP Morgan or a large bank, they think of themselves as a self-directed investor in their personal account, all the way to people who work in as a doctor or a lawyer or any other industry. These people now are saying, I have to take personal responsibility for my finances. And I would say that a good portion of our folks still work with the financial advisor for some portion of their portfolio, but they are self-directing a portion. And so they're looking to us and many others on the platform for information about what our opinions are in terms of what various opportunities look like.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of conventional TV networks have some sort of restraint almost, and it's almost like the network prevents you from having too much of a relationship with the audience. Whereas it seems like on X and your podcast, you are trusted by the people who listen to you. So do you think that adds another kind of newer element that people are looking for when they consume content, particularly about a topic like this?
Yeah, look, I'm married to a journalist. I'm very clear that I'm not a journalist. I'm not trying to be a journalist. I think that journalism has a very important role in society. It's a very different type of work. I almost look at what we do as we're providing analysis on what the journalists go and they find, right? And so if you were to take the mainstream media, that's kind of the front page of the newspaper. What we want to be is we want to be the opinion section. And so what that allows for is us to share our opinion, right? I'm biased. I am putting capital to work in the market. I'm starting businesses. I am evaluating things. And I have skin in the game, which I think does elicit some degree of trust because people know, hey, if he's right, he's going to be rewarded. If he's wrong, he's going to be punished. But at the same time, because I am biased, because I can share my opinion, there are some people who are drawn to that, but also there's plenty of people who are repelled by that. And so you're taking this kind of unbiased approach that journalism goes after, and you say, that's not me. That there's a time and a place for that. But instead, here's what I personally think. And as you do that year after year, I've been doing this almost 10 years now, I think there's a lot of folks who say, you know what, I like the way that this person thinks, or this person's been right more than they've been wrong, and so I'm going to keep paying attention. But actually, surprisingly, people would be shocked to know what percentage of the audience probably listens and says, I'm going to do the opposite of what this guy says, right? He thinks that this is a good idea. I think this guy's dumb. I'm going to go do this other thing. And that's part of what makes a market, is that we're okay, whether you agree with us or don't. As much as I am providing information, I'm also learning. People are commenting, they're responding, and it becomes more of a fluid conversation online than maybe you would get in some of these, kind of one-way communication channels.
Yeah, well, I guess there is the reverse Kramer index, right? Because people love to bet against him. Do you think what you're doing will look kind of like what he's been doing?
No, look, I'm not one that usually is, picking individual stocks or doing that type of stuff. I look at it much more as the business landscape is rapidly changing, especially from a technology standpoint. You have everything from AI to drones to Bitcoin to CRISPR technology. It's just exploding in terms of the rapid kind of acceleration of this innovation. What I do think that we kind of layer in from a finance perspective is I am much more of somebody who will invest behind trends. And so Bitcoin was a good example in kind of the whole crypto sphere. But I've also invested in almost 250 private companies. And so when you look at those companies, we were investing in AI companies back in 2016, 2017. They weren't calling themselves AI companies. They were calling themselves big data or machine learning startups, right? And so these trends kind of evolve over time. Certain things get hot, certain things, kind of dissipate. But really what you're trying to do is you're trying to figure out the answers to what you're facing. And I think that that process of learning is really what has drawn so many people to us, is people realize that journalists in particular, they got to go do all their research and then they have to come out and they have to say, this is fact. We usually have the benefit of, we don't run a journalism platform. And so instead what we can say is we don't know, right? But here's some things that we think are interesting. Here's some things that may be supportive of this idea. Here's some things that are actually contradictory to this idea. Let's wait for more information. Really hard for a journalism platform to do that. And so I think that it is understanding what do you believe? What do you see as true? What do you not agree with? And then just being as transparent as you can with the audience. And what I've been very surprised by is our audience is very sophisticated, right? About 18% of the audience self-reports a household income of over $1 million. Wow. So these are wealthy, self-directed investors that are generally very intelligent. When I put out content, I'm always shocked. There's some expert out there who will respond back or who will DM me and say, oh, you were today talking about tariffs. I happen to be the person who does ABCD things at a think tank focused all my research on tariffs. Here's some reports that we did. And so just as much as you put it out, you're able to elicit the response back. And it's that two-way conversation that makes this really powerful.
Building a community, which is a very trite thing to say, but that is one thing that X offers too. And you see this in Twitter Spaces, where people can chime in or obviously comment at the community notes. How much of an element is that going to be in the show? Are you going to be sort of bringing your audience into it?
Yeah, I don't think that we'll use kind of Twitter Spaces in some of those products. We're very focused on video, and I think that there is some engagement with the audience in the sense that I've always, elicited kind of feedback from people. I've always wanted to answer people's questions on the various content that we've produced. And again, it goes back to, on one hand, the most rewarding thing in my career is we've helped thousands of people get jobs at companies, and then we've also helped a lot of people make a lot of money over time. But when people will message me and say, hey, thank you so much, I bought Bitcoin when I first heard you talk about it in 2018, and now I'm retired. I have the same response to every single person. I say, I didn't do anything. You're the one who took the time to learn. You're the one who took the action. There's plenty of people who heard us talking about certain stuff and they didn't do it. And so it's this kind of entire era of return to personal responsibility.
Yeah.
If you are not in the place you want to be in life, it's probably because you took certain decisions that led you to where you are. You can turn it around. There's plenty of examples of people who did, but you got to go get the information. You got to act, and that's really what we try to help people with.
I'm curious to get your take, because you're talking about the importance of having opinion programming. It seems like that's what a lot of news has frankly become, is opinion programming. And I look back, of course, at the election, and both Trump and Kamala sought out podcasters where it was clearly just opinion programming. What do you think the place is for journalists? Do you think that that's going to exist in a few years the way it does now? Because increasingly people want to listen to somebody like you instead of somebody who's just going to say, here are the facts.
Well, I think there's a place in the world for both, right? And if you look at hard-hitting journalism, let's say war correspondents, let's say investigative journalists, let's say things that are hard for the average person to understand or to get information on, or maybe it's exclusive interviews, things that again are not just regurgitated kind of headlines of, hey, I went and I read a piece of paper that a company put out, and I just rewrote it in our own way and put it on our website. That unique kind of exclusive content, I think, will always be very valued. But I think that there's a place for this kind of exclusive content, and so also. I think that there is a place for opinion-based analysis. Now, what I do think is interesting about the opinion-based analysis is there's opinion kind of talking heads, and then there's opinion based on what you're doing in the market. And so one of the things that we've really benefited from is every time I go to talk about something, if I'm talking about something in a positive or negative light that is not reflected in our portfolio, people know, right? They can very quickly do it. And I meet people all the time and they say, what are you invested in right now?
Yeah.
And that tells you pretty much everything you need to know about how I'm thinking about the world. And so by having skin in the game, I think it again is just you now publicly talking about the things that you're doing yourself. And that in some ways elicits trust. On the other hand, though, it also brings a lot of scrutiny. And there's plenty of people who will say, hey, you thought this was a good idea. It ended up not being a good idea. And if you're going to put yourself out there and you're going to talk about this stuff, you got to be willing to, kind of take both the praise and the critiques hand in hand.
Yeah. Yeah. You got a couple big sponsors, Gemini, who already sponsors your podcast, and then Perplexity, which is very interesting. How did that come about, and what is their role going to look like on the show?
Yeah, so there's a variety of ways that these companies work with us. Some of them are kind of more traditional sponsors, and many of them are kind of more integrated tools that we use within. And where I see the world of media going over time is really kind of two different trends. The first is there's a lot of things that have been created over the last 5 years that has not yet seeped into the mainstream media in terms of their day-to-day activities, but I think will become an important part. AI search engines and a lot of the AI tools is one component of that. A second is things like prediction markets and the ability to actually look at the odds of what are certain events from occurring. And so Perplexity is the tool that I personally use every single day. I think it's incredible. And we will integrate it into the show in terms of being able to actually look for various data points, background information, fact check things, etc. And so we're really excited to be working with them. I've known Arvind over there for a while, and I think that they've built a great product, but not only a great product from like a user interface standpoint, they also continue to integrate a lot of AI models that come out. And so they're constantly keeping you on the cutting edge of what model is the most popular at any given time. When you go and you take a look at the other trend in the media that I think is pretty important is most media companies went through this evolution of, they sold subscriptions for physical newspapers, they transitioned to digital, they started this ad-based model. Mm-hmm. They then said, hey, maybe subscriptions will be a big deal. They started those. And then eventually some of them even panicked and went and became event businesses. But those are really the three main revenue sources. Is you can have kind of ad businesses, subscriptions, or events. What we've been able to do over the the years that I think more and more businesses will start to do, especially these kind of opinion-based content platforms, is we've built a lot of businesses, we invest capital, right? We're able to actually take our audience and create additional media properties by taking our audience and helping other people start theirs. And so you very much fit into what I call kind of like a ball player, right? When you're playing Little League Baseball, somebody who plays shortstop on Tuesday may have to be the pitcher on Thursday, and then he's the catcher or the outfielder on Saturday. That is a very different way of approaching this stuff than just saying, hey, we have very stringent, kind of business model. But it's worked out very well for us, and I think a lot more people will start to follow it.
Interesting. That's the future, you think, of media?
Well, you can see it, right? I mean, like, is Mr. Beast part of the media? I would argue yes.
Yeah.
He's creating content, and he's been able to monetize it with a ton of businesses and various investment activities kind of on the back end. And so the content is the engine, but he's also been able to build a very, very big business with these other components. And this isn't that different. There's been media companies that have sold, physical products through their distribution, and various other kind of attempts to do this. But what I think you're seeing now is people are showing up and they're saying, hey, I'm an entrepreneur. As an entrepreneur, I need to have the content and the distribution and all of that built in, but then selling ads or selling subscriptions is not the only way to actually work here. I want to go and I want to be able to do this other stuff.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned events. You started the Bitcoin Investors Conference. Is that the correct name? Or just the Bitcoin Conference? At the end of the month, and you have Senator Lummis, you have Vivek Ramaswamy, you have Mike Novogratz, you have a lot of big players coming. How did you start creating these events? How did you do so successfully? I mean, you're always having dinners and gatherings. How did you just collect so many people?
I don't know anything about the dinners, but the conferences, I've met a lot of great people over the years, and I really enjoy learning by just talking to people. And so, I read a lot, I try to study stuff, whatever, but like just talking to people gives you real-time information about how other people are thinking about topics. And what I began to realize was these individuals would come to an event if I was able to say to them, I'll make you a trade. You can come here and you can share with an audience your ideas. And the audience will show up because they want to hear from these people. And so it's not, kind of a new business model or anything like that. I think really the big difference is I do all the interviews at the events. And so Bitcoin Investor Week is coming up February 24th through 28th. And I think that I'm going to do something like 40 interviews during the week. And people always say, well, like, that sounds crazy. But what they don't realize is I'm not doing it because I want to put on an event. And it's like, how do we make this as scalable as possible? I get to talk to 40 people that are all really high quality that I want to talk to anyways. They're all going to come together, and it's going to be a really intense 4 days of learning for me. And so whenever you can do that, I think that, it's a selfish thing. The audience is there, they're benefiting from it. The speakers are there, they're benefiting from it. But it's very much focused on like, how do I continue to learn? And so I do all the interviews, and I think that the people really appreciate the fact that it's not just, hey, let's put together, a 5-person panel and we're kind of going through the motions rather than creating content that people actually want.
Okay, so that's just an extension of everything you're already doing. But how did you, because you now have a ton of followers, and I know you worked at Facebook, you've had a very impressive career trajectory. What was it, though, that you think helped you get the 1 million+ followers that you have? Like, how did you build that up over the time period that you have?
Depends who you ask.
I'm asking you.
Some people would say I just spoke my mind, and very few people are willing to do that. Business in particular is very unique in that most people want to be accepted into the in crowd. I think I've always taken the approach of I want to understand what the in crowd is doing, but I actually take great pride in kind of thinking independently, being somewhat of a loner in terms of the things that I'm doing or the thought process. And so naturally, you probably have different thoughts, you view things differently, and then if I say them publicly, it's unique. And one of the problems I see that most people who try to create content on the internet or do any of this stuff is they're all scared. And we've seen this in media, right? Is if you try to serve everybody, you end up serving nobody. And for me, it was never about like who is the audience that we're serving. Instead, it was very much like I am putting this information out there almost as like a log of here are my daily thoughts, and I'm eliciting responses back. And there's this old saying of how do you know you're wrong? Put it on the internet; it'll tell you. Right, and so there's a huge learning feedback loop that happens, which is really helpful. And then probably the biggest thing is I just didn't stop. Right, I've been doing this now for a very long time, intensely every day for a long period, and it just compounds. And I don't see a reason to stop now, so just might as well keep going.
Yeah, well, and as you keep going, it seems like you're also expanding. You've gotten a little bit more political.
Well, the politics came for business and finance.
Yeah, that's fair.
I don't actually
fair.
think that majority of people in business or finance wanted to talk about politics. I didn't want to, but when you see, just take the industries that we're directly involved with, kind of early stage technology, a lot of kind of innovative industries, cryptocurrency, et cetera, when every single day you're having a conversation and it seems like a founder is telling you that they personally were debanked, their company was debanked, they can't launch because there's a regulator somewhere. We're an investor in a company that literally went and tried to get a Fed master account and they got denied for it, just over and over and over again. Eventually you say, well, why is this happening? And so you begin to realize, like, wait a second, if we don't go and actually engage in this, then we're just going to get taken advantage of over and again. And I think that you saw a ton of industries go through this. And, there's everyone from like the Elon Musks who have become very public and kind of hardcore about it, all the way down to, frankly, every conversation I have with early stage founders. They're all talking about this. They're saying, I need to be able to operate my business. And the kind of bureaucratic apparatus started to infringe on that. And there's plenty of regulations or rules or things that are important and they're there for a reason. But there's also a lot of kind of nonsense that was going on. And so I do think that the kind of political wave that you're seeing in business and finance is much less like all of a sudden everyone woke up at one point and was like, let's go into politics. And it was much more about how do we evaluate what the risks are to our business and address them. And a huge risk was this kind of bureaucratic apparatus that really came for tech, business, finance, and people had to respond.
And it seems like that happened really over the last few years. And now as a result, people are much more aware. And you are sort of at the forefront. I feel like every time I speak with you, you're super plugged in, you know what's going on. Are you going to have a bigger hand, you think, in helping sort of determine what regulations or what sort of laws are passed around crypto and whatnot? Do you want to have a bigger role doing that?
I don't want to have a bigger role. I talk to many of the people that are much smarter than me and more focused on that stuff. I'm happy to answer questions or kind of provide my opinion, but I think that the people who are creating those rules, actually being a participant in the market and being so focused on that, there's a lot of things that you don't know. Right. Yeah. And so like, I'm not an expert on how getting legislation passed. And so we need people who are experts on that. If you look in crypto in particular at all of the lobbying efforts that happened, I learned a hell of a lot talking to a lot of the people who were doing that because they were explaining to me how the process works and what are examples of where this has worked in the past and where are examples that actually didn't work or backfired. And so I think of it as everyone kind of has their own seat at the table or the member of the team. And I'm happy to kind of provide information, but I'll leave that to people who are much better suited to do it.
I'm curious to get your take on meme coins because that has just swept, I feel like the entire space, people have gotten really obsessed with it. Should it be regulated, or do you think it's just a situation where the buyer should beware?
I think that people should be able to do whatever they want with their money, but also we should be very careful about encouraging the behavior. And so, it's no different than the lottery, right? The odds of winning the lottery are very low. We have somehow claimed the moral high ground by saying that it funds education and the state is involved, et cetera. But at the end of the day, it is incredibly low odds, and you're essentially preying on people who have lack of discipline or lack of education.
Yeah.
And so, there's no different than what's going on with a lot of the meme coins and stuff like that. People want to gamble and people want to be entertained. And Las Vegas is very successful because of that. You see sports gambling, a number of these things all starting to kind of become more prevalent. Put aside for a second, kind of what is the analysis as to whether it's actually good for society or not. At the end of the day, we're a very individualistic, kind of rights-based society, and so people should be allowed to do what they want with their money. I don't go and buy meme coins. I don't, promote them. I don't want to elicit people to go and buy those things. But it's kind of this weird balance where you want people to have freedom, but you also should do a really good job of educating people on the likelihood that these things are worthless and probably not going to work out.
Do you think there should be a crackdown on that or no?
Well, my understanding, at least talking to a couple of lawyers, is that currently the way that these things are being launched, they are fully legal. They kind of, have figured out a way to do this. And I don't think it's any different than people, setting up a website where you can go put your money in and buy a product that doesn't work or, whatever. But it kind of comes back to this idea of like, actually, maybe the reason why people are so focused on the meme coin stuff is because we haven't done a good enough job inspiring them to work on things that actually matter. And so if there's a void of inspiration, people are drawn to kind of the lowest common denominator.
Yeah.
And so you can look at it and you can say, hey, that's so bad, you guys shouldn't do that. Or we can work harder to actually inspire these people to go and say, look, rather than put your capital into this thing that obviously is going to be a destruction of economic value over the long run, instead, let's give you opportunities where you can put it so that we can actually create value. And again, is it a education thing? Is it just a discipline thing? And there's kind of the emotional controls and stuff like that, or is it a bigger societal thing? Right?
Yeah.
And I think you're seeing this kind of vibe shift where you have a lot of young people who are saying, hey, wait a second, we can just go build stuff. We can actually go and have an impact here. And so hopefully a lot of that capital and kind of attention that's been drawn to those lowest common denominator things will start to shift back to kind of more meaningful and long-term value creation.
Yeah, but you're right. I mean, I've heard a lot of people say it sort of stems from financial nihilism, because it sort of feels like, well, I'm never going to be able to pay off my loans, buy a home. You might as well just bet on meme coins.
Look, one of the biggest misconceptions, I think, in the entire United States economy and mainstream conversation is that globalism was a good thing. And it's this very weird dynamic because most people in the media who kind of control the output and most people who are engaging in consuming that media, it has been good for them.
Yep.
And so the nuance is actually globalism's been good for some people and not good for other people. And so if you look, maybe that used to be like it was good for 80% of people and 20% of people were hurt by it. Well, that number has been shifting. And I don't know what the exact number, maybe it's 50-50 now, right?
Yep.
But there's still some portion of people who have really benefited from globalization. These are the people who own the means of production, they own capital and investment assets, they own companies, et cetera. And they've been able to outsource, get cheaper capital and better supply chains and efficiency and all this stuff. But that's also hollowed out a massive part of the economy. And so you have people who aren't in that top 50% who are actually been destroyed by this.
Yeah.
And so if you look, the current generation, kind of the millennial and Gen Z generation, it's the first time in decades where they actually do not feel better off than their parents were.
Yeah.
Right? They're buried in student debt. The homes are unaffordable. The dollar's been devalued 25-30% in the last 5 years. They're watching as everyone around them is posting on Instagram and they feel like everyone else is rich and I'm not.
Yeah.
And so all of these things kind of reinforce it. And so it goes back to this idea of, again, if you want to actually get to the root cause of this, you have to say, well, are we actually providing opportunity for people in this country? And again, the answer is kind of complex because for some people, yes, there's incredible opportunity. For a lot of people, no. And so how do you go and try to bifurcate and figure out who is not being served and how do you create those opportunities? It's just really hard, right? And I actually don't think that a single federal administration can solve the problem. I think it's a local, state, and federal thing. I think there's entrepreneurship that plays into this. I think there's investors that have to participate. And then you're playing in a global game.
Yeah.
And so what you do locally is not just in a silo. You have to also compete with other countries and other entrepreneurs elsewhere. And so on one hand, it's intellectually stimulating. On the other, it's really hard.
Yeah, very, very multifaceted. Would love to get your take as well on the Bitcoin reserve, on a America First crypto reserve. Are these good ideas? Do you think they should be implemented?
I currently think with 95% confidence we're going to get the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve.
Okay.
I think that the current administration understands Bitcoin is global store of value. It is likely to be very different, both in structure and in the way that it is being held by countries, companies, and individuals than other crypto assets. And I think it's a very good idea. I also think that the United States is not just going to embrace Bitcoin. I think that it will embrace things like stablecoins and other kind of financial assets. I think the question when it comes to kind of the altcoins is what is the unique value that they bring that can't be gotten somewhere else? And most of the altcoins, in my opinion, are more akin to tech stocks. And so some tech stocks are good, some tech stocks are bad, whatever. But now you get into a competition of why should the United States go buy an altcoin rather than buy Google, Amazon, Facebook, whatever stock, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that Bitcoin kind of being this separate, fully focused on global store of value will put it in kind of a different category. And I think that the strategic reserve will end up just being Bitcoin only.
Interesting. Okay. What are one or two other things you would love to see this administration do when it comes to crypto and Bitcoin?
I think stablecoins are a really big deal. One of the things that I've changed my mind on over the years is I used to think that Bitcoin was a threat to the US dollar. And so it was kind of this weird dynamic where you're like, I'm an American, I want to see the US dollar succeed, where I obviously have this great, fortunate position to be in, but also this Bitcoin thing is very obvious this is going to be successful. And so like, is there this, seesaw almost?
Yeah.
what the market has showed us is actually that was the wrong way to think. Instead, the right way to think about it was that Bitcoin was going to be successful and the dollar was going to be successful. The currencies that were going to kind of fall at the feet were all of the weak fiat currencies of other nations. And so that's pretty much what you've seen. You've seen the dollar and Bitcoin both rise in popularity. A big reason of that is the stablecoins. Stablecoins have essentially established and kind of extended dollar dominance and allowed for accessibility of US dollar for a lot of people who didn't previously have it. One area of stablecoins that I think is really interesting that the United States would drastically benefit from very quickly getting out into the world is a yield-bearing stablecoin. And there's a bunch of different people trying to work on this. But imagine if you're in an emerging market somewhere, you've never had a bank account. Now not only do you have access to dollars, but now you can actually get yield on those dollars. Pretty impactful stuff, right? And so I think that there's stuff like that like from a foreign policy standpoint, kind of soft power, et cetera, the United States will pursue. And then I also think that probably the most important thing the administration can do is not just in crypto, just generally, and they're doing this, we want technologists to be successful.
Yeah.
Just say that every day, over and over and over again, and say, we're not going to let you break the law. We're not going to let you do crazy things that are going to put people in danger. We're not going to let you do things that are unethical or immoral, but we want you to be successful. As long as you play by what most people believe to be common sense rules, we are going to support you. We're going to do everything we can. And a lot of times that's just, we're going to get out of your way. Yeah. And if they can do that, I think that entrepreneurs have proven for centuries that they will figure out solutions to problems, they will advance us forward. And so it's really just, instead of being abrasive and kind of, the headwind, become a tailwind and say, we're behind you, we're ready to go, what do you need? And I think that if we can do that within those common sense frameworks, we're going to end up in a much better place in 4 years.
Yeah, interesting. And it's interesting that you made the point about stablecoins potentially sort of serving as a tool for soft power, right? So maybe we don't need so much USAID going to these countries.
My base case,
but that's interesting. Is that something you think will be developed and implemented?
Well, my base case is that 50% of federal employees probably could be let go, and there will be some, kind of change that happens, but over the long run, you won't even notice. And it's not because the employees are bad or they're not doing their job or whatever. It's just that over time you create this bureaucracy, right? Yeah. And you see it in companies. And I think that really companies, which are supposed to be much more efficient, right? They're supposed to be driving shareholder value. They're supposed to be looking at profitability. The government's not a company, right? It's not supposed to just solely be focused on it. It has to provide services, and there's a bunch of different arguments for this. But if companies can become bloated, the government definitely
can,
so, right? Yeah. And so again, if you go and you take an approach of, hey, we're going to just fire everyone and good luck, that's very different than if you say, hey, look, actually right now you have capped salary because you're a federal employee. And sure, there's some benefits that come with that, et cetera. But what if we can get you into a position because you're smart, you're hardworking, you want to do a good job, into a position where you can make more money, you can contribute more to society, it's maybe more intellectually stimulating, and inspire people to go do that stuff rather than, I know a lot of people who work in different various government functions, and they're essentially just getting their paycheck, right? Yeah. And they're like, hey, look, there's nothing really inspiring going on at work, but I got to do my job, not get fired, move on. And so I do think that there's this whole focus on kind of Doge, et cetera, is at the end of the day, we spend a lot of money as taxpayers on a variety of things. Mm-hmm. Some of them are amazing, and we're super, super fortunate that the government does it. There's other things that I think collectively people look at and they go, that's kind of crazy.
Yep.
And nobody is going to agree on where the line is, where we switch from that's a good idea to that's a bad idea. But I do think that we can chop off the tail of the really bad ideas. And you're starting to see some of that. But again, it goes back to Doge is not going to be able to cut $3 trillion. They maybe cut 1 or 2, which many people don't even think they can do. But let's say that they could. You still need tariffs. You still need to look at, well, what is the tax rate? You still need to look at, is GDP growing? These things are a complex machine that all work in tandem together. And so I think that if the current administration can go in, they can cut government spending, they can use the tariffs to raise more government revenue, if they can lower the tax rate, and they're able to become more supportive of kind of innovative industries, I think that we'll live in this golden age that everyone is excited about.
Yeah. Are there any other priorities or sort of asks that you hear from people in crypto that they really want to see implemented?
The nice thing about crypto is that people have a foot in the crypto industry. People will be like, oh, I participate in that industry. But at the end of the day, they're Americans, right? Or they live elsewhere as well. But the Americans in crypto, they are worried about the same things. They want a border that's secure. They want housing that's affordable. They want to feel like they can walk down the street in whatever city or town they live in without feeling like they're unsafe. They want to feel like their government is cheering for them, not working against them. It's very basic stuff. And so I think that when you go and you look at it, actually one of the most interesting things is if the United States had handled the global financial crisis better, would the whole idea of Bitcoin not even be as popular? Right? Because another part of this is the psychology of millennials in general, I think is very unique in that most of them were somewhere between like middle school up until their first working years when the global financial crisis happened. So for the most part, they didn't have material money that they could lose in the global financial crisis. They might have lost their job, or it was hard to get a job when they got out of college or whatever, but like they weren't, 20 years into their career, all that money I made for 20 years,
I can't retire
lost.
now, exactly.
Correct.
A different life stage.
But psychologically, they were old enough to understand what happened. And they probably saw their parents or their friends' parents, etc., suffer during that time. So it's a very unique kind of generation in that they saw what it could happen, but they actually weren't personally hurt by it nearly as much as maybe the other generation was. And so now as they've risen up, you can see a lot of the distrust in these institutions. You can see a lot of the popularity of things that are outside of the system, whether it's content, financial assets, etc. Like it really has had this psychological impact. And so I think that crypto in particular, and really Bitcoin, is a lot of people saying, I don't trust whatever the alternative is, and so therefore I want to go participate in this. If you're the administration, how do you win back trust?
Yeah.
Right? In a weird way, you support the alternative that all these people are already running to. You say, hey, actually, you guys are right. Like if you sit down and you're in the administration, you're like, everything's great. People are like, you are out of touch with reality.
Right.
Like, do you see what I'm going through every single day?
Yeah.
Instead of you sit down and you say, hey, you know what? I know that grocery prices are high. I know homes are unaffordable. I know that this is happening. What can we do to solve it? Here's what our plan is. That's a whole different ballgame now. People may still disagree with you. They may not like your politics, whatever. But at least now you're saying, I hear you. Right? Yeah. I understand that the problem exists. And I think that that's really where you saw a lot of support kind of swing in the direction of the current administration coming from the Bitcoin world. Was people were just saying, wait a minute, you guys are at least saying like, hey, we think you guys should be able to do this. The other side is basically saying, no, you can't do this.
Right.
It's like a pretty black and white, kind of difference in statements. And so now the question is like, what are they going to do? Are they going to buy Bitcoin for the strategic Bitcoin reserve? Are there going to be changes to legislation, or maybe the regulatory bodies are going to take a different approach? Like let's see now what the campaign promises that actually turn into results are, and then people will judge at the end, right? And I frankly think that every president goes through this, where some of the things they do is great, some of the things are good, and some of the things are bad. And that's kind of how it happens when you've got somebody who's got to go and figure out a whole bunch of things across different industries. But the Bitcoiners so far are pretty excited about
That's interesting. Invalidating, in a way, like what they believe in, it wins back trust. So
yeah, and also, a weird thing is you see this in financial organizations and in corporations. When do they buy Bitcoin? Once all the individuals in the company have bought Bitcoin. Right? So like the CEO of a publicly traded company, he doesn't say, I think our company should buy Bitcoin, until he personally thinks that he personally should buy Bitcoin. Right? Same thing at these financial organizations. Why are all of these Wall Street firms now starting to go into Bitcoin? Because enough people inside the organization became Bitcoiners. They started to buy Bitcoin personally, and they're like, oh, this thing is working. If it's good enough for me personally, why aren't we doing it at the firm? Why aren't we doing it for our clients? And so it kind of infiltrates in this weird way. Now extrapolate that to the government. A bunch of people own Bitcoin. And they're not doing it necessarily because they think that the U.S. dollar is going to fail or anything like that. I think there's a value alignment, but also there's a lot of people who just say, hey, it's an investment for me. Yeah. And so once you get enough people who own Bitcoin inside of an administration, it bubbles up, and eventually people are like, I think that we should do something here. And I think that's what you saw. You see everyone from the Howard Lutnicks and the Scott Bessents to Trump and his family, all the way even to, I think, like RFK, Tulsi Gabbard, they all own Bitcoin. And so them being a pro-Bitcoin administration is not surprising if all of the individuals that make it up own Bitcoin.
Yeah. What's your prediction? In 5 years, do you think 99% of people have Bitcoin in their 401k or in their retirement? How mainstream does it become, and how quickly?
Well, I think that nothing will ever get to 99%. There's still a very large portion of the world that doesn't have the internet. And so when you think of let's kind of confine this to the United States in general,
yes.
I think that the percentage penetration will continue to substantially increase. We'll probably get to over 50% at some point. I don't know if it's 5 years, 10 years, but we'll definitely get over 50%. And I think there will be a bifurcation. There will be kind of the hardcore believers that still see Bitcoin as something that you self-custody and you hold your keys and you're waiting for the government default or some massive issue to happen in the traditional system, and this is like kind of your life raft or your way out. That percentage of people who own Bitcoin will continue to dwindle in size only because the other percentage of people who just want price exposure will grow. And so they're kind of getting diluted, not
Yeah.
because the group is actually becoming smaller, they're growing. They're just not growing at the pace that people say, I want the ETF, or I want it in my 401k, right? Most people who are buying the ETF are not buying it because they think that the government's going to fail, or they think the debt bubble is going to pop. They're buying it because they're like, hey, this thing goes up a lot, and it seems to have a non-correlation, and if I put it into a portfolio, the Sharpe ratio goes up. Checks all my boxes, I'm going to buy some. I'm going to put 1 to 5%, and then I'm going to leave it and forget it. And I'm not on Bitcoin Twitter. I'm not talking about this every single day. I'm just kind of living my life. And so that percentage, I think, is growing very, very rapidly. But you'll always have kind of the people who got us here, right? And they're very important for Bitcoin because they were able to protect Bitcoin up until the point where kind of Wall Street now is creating all these financial products. But I tell a lot of those people, and a lot of them are my friends, I say, listen, like, you won, right? Like, this thing started out at less than a penny. It now, BlackRock, Fidelity, all these companies that are these incumbents on Wall Street, they now are taking over the, marketing and the distribution of this asset. Sure, you may not like how they're doing it. You may not like the custody situation. That you may not like they're talking about price as much as they're talking about, the ethos or whatever. But like, you guys got it to this point.
Yeah.
And so you'll always be important. It's just that the ground is shifting a little bit in terms of who's participating.
Will that community be on to the next thing? And what is the next thing?
No, the Bitcoiners, they're into Bitcoin. They're going to always be into Bitcoin, and I don't think that'll ever change.
That's a wrap on today's episode of New York Next. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. You can also catch us on the New York Post YouTube channel. And of course, be sure to follow us on social media for the latest updates and behind-the-scenes content. We're on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. Join the conversation and let us know what you think.